So we have 9x squared minus 16 is equal to 0. So we're demonstrating the square root property. So we just take this over to the right hand side, the 16, and then multiply both sides by 1/9. Alright. And then square root. We got to get rid of this square, so we square root both sides. Remember, don't forget to write plus or minus here. And 16 and 19 are both perfect squares, so that works out really well. We have the square root of 16, which is 4, and then the square root of 9 is going to be 3. All right. Now remember, there's two solutions. There's the positive solution and then the negative solution. 4/3 minus 4/3. You can always check your work by plugging that in up here. Take the 4/3, plug it in, and this left-hand side should equal 0. If it doesn't, then that's not a solution. Okay, in this section here, we're going to be, we'll call it a new section, but we'll still label it as problem number 6. We're going to be completing the square. All right, we're going to be completing the square. So it's just another technique for finding the solutions of a quadratic equation. X squared, and actually I like it better than the quadratic formula sometimes, which we're going to be getting at here in just a minute. Okay, completing the square. So this is how this goes. What we're going to do, okay, first off, I must say that this coefficient here must be positive and it must be a 1. Right, so there's a 1 here, but we don't write it. But there must be a 1 as a coefficient and it must be positive. And if it's not, then we'll have to multiply through to get this to be a 1. And we'll do a problem like that here in just a minute. But what you do is just go ahead, bring down the 6. Okay, we're going to take half of this number right here. So whatever this coefficient is, we take half. Now go ahead, carry down the sign, plus, and I'll just go ahead and write it like that. So we're going to take half of that. We'll simplify that here in just a minute. And then we go minus. Okay, and then we always go minus here. And then we square this number. We square it. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify this. So this is 3. But I'm going to go ahead and write 3 squared here, okay? And then we just go ahead and rewrite the minus 2, whatever the constant is at the end. Alright, so we take half of this number, and then we square it and put it here, and make sure there's a minus sign always right here. Alright, and that's basically it, and now all we have to do now is solve for x. And then that just basically goes back to the square root property that we just got through going over. Alright, so 3 squared is 9, so we're going to end up with, here I'll go ahead and write it out. At this point, when we're learning something new, we shouldn't probably skip steps. And then we'll go ahead and write this as a 3 here. Okay, so this is 9, 10, 11. Right. And if you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and take it over to the right hand side. So we'll have a positive 11 there, and I'll just go ahead and rewrite here. So maybe we can take some skip some steps, just as long as they're small steps. Now we go ahead and square root both sides. So this is like that square root property. Now remember to write plus or minus, and we're going to square root both sides. And when we square root a square, the square just goes away. Right. And so now we're left with x is equal to, now take this 3 over, so we got minus 3 will be plus or minus the square root of 11. Isn't that magnificent? Alright, And then now keep in mind, remember, there's two solutions here. There's the plus, right, and then you got the minus square root of 11 here. Okay, so we have two solutions, and you should be able to take either one of these and plug them back into the original, and this left-hand side should be equal to 0. Okay. All right. Okay, we'll label this as number 7 here. Alright, so we have 2x squared minus 4x plus 3, and that is equal to 0. So we're going to find these solutions by completing the square, and that means, remember, that this must be a 1 out here, but there's a 2. There's a 2, so what we're going to need to do is we're going to multiply, here I'll write it out here, we're going to multiply by 1/2, alright, all the way across here, okay? So a half times 2, that gives me 1. And then a half times the minus 4, that will be minus 2. And then plus 3/2. And of course a half times 0 is just 0. So now that it's in the proper form, so we go ahead, rewrite the x, bring this sign down. Now we want to take half of this. Okay, so half of 2 is just 1. Minus, remember we always put a minus sign here, and then we square this number, and that's just going to end up being 1 because 1 squared is 1. And then we'll go ahead and write the plus 3/2 is equal to 0. Okay, so we got minus 1 plus 3/2, this is 1.5, so this just ends up becoming what? A half. Right, so x minus 1 squared plus a half is equal to 0. Take this half over, so we have negative a half. Alright, and then square root both sides. Remember to write the plus or minus here. Alright. Okay. Alright. You know, and I'm going to leave this part right here as an exercise. Okay, so you fill in the rest, and I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer. Alright. Go ahead and give you the answer. So 1 plus or minus. This is what you should end up coming up with. Now, we had a previous section on complex numbers. Alright, so hopefully you went over the complex number section. It was the previous section to this on what is going on here. We have a negative under the square root. Alright, we have a negative under the square root. And it's like, where does that come from? Well, hopefully you looked at the previous section on complex numbers. Okay. And I should say this, actually, you could get rid of the radical in the denominator by square rooting square root of 2 times the bottom, square root of 2 times the top. And actually this thing would be written as 1 plus or minus square root of 2 over 2 if you wanted to get rid of the radical of there in the top. All right. Okay.